Um, and if you want to introduce yourself in the chat box, feel free to do so. Let us know who you are, where you're from, why you're here, what you're excited about, all that kind of stuff. But otherwise, I think we might just get started. So, what's up? Why are we all here? Yeah, I hope that you're here for a workshop about how to meet with your MP and how to engage with this parliamentary petition that we have going about the just transition legislation that we want to see. Emma, if I could have the second slide, I'll run through the agenda. So today, what we're going to talk about is Emma's going to talk for a minute about the 5 markers of a government in emergency mode. So how will we know when the government is taking the climate emergency seriously and treating it like an emergency? We'll go over the strategy for the first 100 days of Parliament, which we're counting as starting on the first day of Parliament. So what are we, and what is the Climate Emergency Unit, and what is the Council of Canadians planning to do in those first 100 days of this new government? We'll talk about the Code Red strategy. So what we're doing with this petition, what is it, how does it work, why are we doing it? And then what we hope you will do to join us in using this parliamentary petition for just transition legislation to build power in our communities and to pressure MPs to really pass that legislation or table it and then pass it. And then we're going to talk about how to meet with your MPs in this specific context. So I imagine that many of you have experience meeting with your MPs in the past, but we're just going to hone in on this one particular topic and prepare for meetings that we might have in the next couple of months. Then we're going to do breakout groups focusing on that, talking about common talking points between parties and getting you ready to talk to your MPs. Then we're just going to close her up. So that's the plan for today. And if we could have the next slide, then we can keep going. So I think this will not be a surprise to anybody. We're in a code red for the climate, but our governments aren't taking it seriously. There's a lot of reasons for this. One I like to highlight is that corporate interests have been influencing Canada's policy on climate and environment it's now. And they're the corporate lobby is quite organized. They do a lot of lobbying of our MPs and other government officials every day. And so if we want to challenge that, we need to become very organized ourselves. We need to engage in that lobbying ourselves and do that in a really coordinated way. So that's why we're here today. Can we have the next slide, please, Emma? So I think maybe, Emma, you want to talk about these next few things because they're the ideas of the Climate Emergency Unit.
I absolutely can. So in the Climate Emergency Unit, we have a few indicators that we've developed that show that a government is in emergency mode. And they're based off of the research that Seth Klein did for his book called A Good War, which compares the mobilization required for the climate emergency to the mobilization that Canada underwent in the Second World War. And there's actually a lot of comparisons that we can make to the pandemic as well. So the first marker of a government that's in emergency mode is that it spends what it takes to win. So that's about 2% of our GDP that would be spent on climate mitigation or greenhouse gas emission reductions, and another 2% of our GDP spent specifically on social infrastructure to make sure that no one's left behind. So based on the 2019 GDP of Canada, that would be about $80 billion annually. And to put that in context, we spent about $5 billion a week on COVID last year. Marker number 2 of a government in climate emergency mode is that it creates new institutions to get the job done. During the Second World War, one of the most compelling aspects of it is how quickly we upped our industrialization to produce the vehicles and the different components that were required to win the war. So that included boats, that included airships, that included housing. We actually created 28 new Crown Corps, and within just 2 years, Canada increased manufacturing of aircraft 25-fold. And before the war, shipbuilders numbered only 2,000. but at the end of it, there were about 30,000. We've seen nothing of this sort in response to the climate crisis, and it's time that we act, that we create the institutions that we need to get the job done. And that might include Crown Corps. The only Crown Corp that's being created, there's 2 Crown Corps that have been created under Justin Trudeau, and one of them was buying a pipeline. Yeah, Robin's shaking her head. I can't see everyone here, but I saw Robin's reaction to that. So marker number 3 of a government that's in emergency mode is that it shifts from voluntary and incentive-based policies to mandatory measures. So right now we are creating incentives for people to buy electric vehicles, for instance, or a little bit of a rebate for people to make their home more energy efficient. What we need to do is move from that voluntary policy to mandatory policy, like a mandatory mask mandate, right? Like everyone has to social distance. No non-essential services can be open. But what would that look like in climate mode? That means making sure that no homes can hook up to fossil fuel heating starting next year. That means that we can't, no new vehicles that use fossil fuel to run can be sold in parking lots starting in 2023. We can no longer be investing in any kind of technology or infrastructure that includes fossil fuels. So it means like mandatory, but also near term and clear dates, because we can see some policies like that cropping up, but the years are for 2035 or 2040, and that's not nearly soon enough. Marker number 4 is to tell the truth about the severity of the climate crisis and communicate a sense of urgency about the measures necessary to combat it, or let's just tell the truth. So, you know, the leaders we remember best from the Second World War were outstanding communicators who walked a very careful line because they were forthright about the gravity of the crisis, but they still managed to give Canadians and people who lived in Canada hope. And similarly, that's how our present governments have modeled emergency communication around the pandemic and COVID, like daily updates. Imagine if we had that level of data collection and communication around the climate crisis. We hear regularly from our public health officials, why not from our climate officials? And the 5th marker is leave no one behind. So I would actually say that during COVID or the pandemic, and also during the Second World War, there are lots of examples of people or groups of people in society getting left behind. But we know that it's essential to the climate mobilization that we not leave anyone behind, that we put in the social infrastructure in place to build solidarity and make a better world for everyone. And, you know, that's known as the just transition, which is why we're here today. And that also means uplifting and following Indigenous leadership. So, Robin, do you want me to take this one?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the Climate Emergency Unit has a strategy for the first 100 days of Parliament. And we're going to say that starts on November 22nd, when the House goes back to sitting, so it ends March 2nd. But we're starting that strategy now. So it's a little bit more than 100 days, giving ourselves some more time to mobilize and work with folks like you to get the job done. So we're going to be arranging meetings with MPs, working with their concerned constituents to get the constituents to those MPs to meet with them and express their concern about the climate crisis. I recently heard from some folks that I was working with in PEI that their MP didn't hear from any of their constituents about climate change until 4 years ago, and he'd been an MP for 11 years. So the people that we're electing need to hear from us that we care about this issue greatly. We're also going to be putting on some workshops around the next week. We'll be delivering a workshop around the announcement of the new cabinet. And then we'll also be putting together a workshop around the cabinet's mandate letters. So what does the new cabinet and the people who are on the cabinet, and what do their mandate letters mean for the climate emergency? What do we need to do to react to them? As you probably all know, COP26, not 25, there's a typo on this slide, is coming up. Is it this week already? Next week. Thanks, I'm losing track of time. But what the Climate Emergency Unit has 2 of our team members going to COP. So we're going to have them give us an update about how Canada is doing at COP about halfway through. And that workshop will be called The World is Watching, because we know that Canada does have a reputation, a kind of roller coaster of a reputation on the world stage around climate. And more recently, we're starting to be called out for our lack of action and the fact that our greenhouse gas emissions aren't actually going down. Finally, we're going to be mobilizing leaders from different sectors. We'll have an arts and culture sectoral campaign, a food campaign, youth campaign, first responders, health, faith. All these different sectors have a different role to play in mobilizing the people that they are associated with, and also mobilizing their own cabinet ministers to make sure that every sector of Canadian society is in emergency mode. Truly, finally, I know I just said finally, we're going to be focusing on our influential ministers and also senior staff that are most influential to the climate file, like Chrystia Freeland, Sarah Goodman, and making sure that they know that we are ready to move into emergency mode.
Thanks, Emma. So why are we doing this now? I feel like everything Emma just said kind of points to that. I'm sure none of this is a surprise to any of you, but this year has seen more climate chaos in Canada and around the world than ever before. And especially October right now is a key political moment for the climate here and around the world. Like Emma mentioned, there's the climate negotiations coming up in Glasgow, which can be a great pressure point for us to use as a movement. Cabinet is being announced on Tuesday, and so we'll soon find out both who the ministers are in the different departments, and also we'll see what their mandate letters are and what the initial intentions of this government are. And finally, this month and last month have been full of student climate strikes. There was a big climate strike in September and then another one coming up on Friday. So there's a lot of mobilizations going on here and around the world, and it's just a great time for us to be moving with this brand new government to get them going from the very get-go. Emma, can I have the next slide? Thanks. Oh, I had my slide. Sorry, I was mixed up. I was looking at the wrong thing. Anyway, all the things I said are real. And like I was mentioning in the beginning, corporate interests have a huge influence on our climate policy now, and they have for decades. Something I wanted to mention, for example, is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is one of the biggest oil and gas lobbyists in the, I would say the biggest oil and gas lobbyist in the country. They have a history of meeting with government offices and officials more than like dozens of times every single day. And so it's incumbent upon us and our movements to be meeting with our MPs and our governments as much as we can to combat that access. They have so much access to our government and so much access to policymakers that we need to push back, and we need to make ourselves put ourselves at that table as well. CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, just last month, they spent tens of thousands of dollars on Facebook ads, convincing people to repeat and spout like industry propaganda that supports the oil and gas industry in protecting its profits by undermining their own interests or like communities' own interests. They asked people to participate in the consultation around a Just Transition Act, and people did. They were repeating CAP's propaganda lines because they have so much power to reach people. And that was just last month. In the last 10 years, for example, some of you might remember that horrible omnibus bill that Harper pushed through that gutted environmental legislation in Canada. That the contents of that bill and the idea that it should be done in an omnibus way was directly influenced by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. So this industry group and lobbyists from outside of it as well, like that, we just can't underestimate that power. And so we need to be deeply, deeply organized together, and we need to be focusing on pressuring our governments to do better, to give us the just transition legislation we need. So Emma, if you give me the next slide, please. So what we're asking for is for MPs to publicly support a just transition in response to the Code Red, and we want them to table and pass just transition legislation. The Liberal government promised this in 2019, and we're still waiting. So we want to see that, and that's the focus of our organizing and what this workshop's all about. So can I have the next slide, please, Emma? What we have created, so the Council of Canadians has launched something we're calling Flood Parliament. And the idea is that we've created a parliamentary petition that asks for just transition legislation that does a number of things. I'm going to walk through the whole petition in a minute. And the purpose of this, the way parliamentary petitions work is that if you collect a minimum of 25 signatures on paper, you can take those to any MP in the country and ask them both to table that petition in the House of Commons and speak about it out loud. Every MP has about 1 minute a day to speak to petitions. And so we're looking to have people like you across the country collecting petition signatures in different locations and delivering them to their MPs in batches of 25, repeatedly asking the same MPs and different MPs to be speaking about this in the House of Commons so that we can have waves of support and people speaking directly in the House of Commons where legislation is made, speaking frequently about the need for just transition legislation. And this strategy is kind of twofold. There's the one part of actually getting our voices heard directly in the legislature, but also it's about movement building so that we can continue this work together after we win this legislation and into the next thing. Because in order to get 25 petition signatures, you've got to talk to 25 people. So you're going to be meeting people in your communities. You're going to be talking to them about why they care about a just transition, what that could do for their lives, what kind of action they might be willing to take. You'll get to know each other and build a movement that way. And so I love this strategy because it's both about building power on the ground and moving MPs to take action. So I find it pretty exciting. I'll just walk through what the petition calls for now so that everyone can hear that. I think Emma or Dylan is going to drop the petition link in the chat as well. There's going to be some links throughout the whole workshop today. So we've made this petition. It calls for just transition legislation that reduces emissions by at least 60% below 2005 levels by 2030 and makes significant contributions to emissions reductions internationally. We want this legislation to plan a wind down of the fossil fuel industry and related infrastructure, end fossil fuel subsidies, and transitions the whole economy to one that is decarbonized. We need this legislation to create new public economic institutions, like Emma was saying. We need that to get the job done. And we need to expand public ownership of services and utilities so that we can make this transition. So that might be things like public power, utilities, telecom, transit, etc. We need to expand the public ownership so that we can minimize private interference in these kinds of institutions and services. We need this legislation to create good green jobs, and we need to drive inclusive workforce development. This is really about leaving no one behind, making sure that the job creation and prosperity that comes with this transition is equally shared across society. Emma, can I have the next one? Thanks. We need this legislation to protect and strengthen human rights and workers' rights, respecting Indigenous rights, sovereignty, and knowledge by including them in creating and implementing this legislation, and ensure migrant justice as well. So this again is leaning towards the leave no one behind aspect. We need the legislation to expand the social safety net through new income supports, through decarbonized public housing, and operational funding for affordable and accessible transit countrywide. And we need it to be paid for by increasing taxes on the wealthiest and corporations and public financing. So when I read that, I get chills. It sounds like a future I want to live in. So that's the contents of the petition and the specifics of what we're asking for this legislation to do. So how does this whole thing work? I alluded to it before, but let's get right into it. The way parliamentary petitions work, Emma, I can look at the next slide, please. You can build support in your community for this legislation and for a just transition by first printing out the petition. One key feature is that it's kind of long, so it needs to be printed on legal-sized paper so that you can both read it and sign it. Then you collect 25 signatures at a time. You can collect more than that all at once, but I would suggest only delivering 25 at a time. You can talk to your friends, neighbors, community organizations, whatever groups you're part of, anyone can sign the petition. You can, and then once you have 25, you'll ask your MP for a meeting where you'll ask them to table the petition and speak about it in Parliament. This is the key part because technically they could table the petition without ever speaking about it out loud. But what we really want is for them to be in the House of Commons speaking out loud about the need for Just Transition Act. Then once you meet with them, if they agree, you hand over the petitions, they do their thing, you keep an eye on them to make sure that they live up to their promise. And then you can report back to both the people who signed your petition in your community and to us about how they responded, because we want to know and keep track of which MPs have committed. So Emma, I'll take the next slide, please. What's happening so far? This is, we've just launched this tactic a few weeks ago. We just finished, the Council of Canadians hosted a week of action that ended on Sunday. And we saw more than 70 groups in the last week or so sign up in 24 locations across the country. So folks are doing petition drives, rallies, and other kinds of events in support of this. We've got 5,700 people and counting. I keep losing track because the numbers keep growing, but 5,700 people have sent a letter to the PM already asking for this legislation. And we have 3 MPs committed already and 7 more requests on the table, and we're waiting to hear back. So my question for you is, maybe your MP will be next. Maybe you'll be the next one. And I want to reiterate here that all of this is being accomplished because people are working together. So like I was saying before, this is equal parts about moving your MP and building a movement that can sustain pressure on our government for the long run so that we can accomplish or get to all of those markers, like Emma was saying, and get through not only this legislation and beyond that as well. So at this point, I wonder if anyone has any questions, because we just dumped a lot of information. I know Dylan's been answering some questions in the chat, so I'm just going to scan through the chat and see. If you have any new questions, please drop them in there too. Okay, one question. Are MPs obligated to respond? That's a great question. I think MPs are obligated to respond to their constituents within, I think it might be 45 days. That doesn't mean they need to say yes. They're not obligated to table the petition. But I will add, once the petition has been tabled, the government of the day, which is the liberal government, that once the petition has been tabled, the government is required to respond within 45 calendar days. So whether or not the government, or it'll take us a few tries to win this legislation. And in the meantime, we're going to be hearing back from the Liberal government about what they think about this. We're going to hear what their response is and learn a lot about that. Someone's asking which MPs have committed. I will admit that I'm very tired and I don't want to get this wrong. So I'm going to ask Dylan if he can double check, because we have a list of yeses and a list of maybes and I don't want to get them crisscrossed. So Dylan, if you could help me, that would be wonderful. We'll come back to that question. Do you have to get signatures in your own writing? It's not required, but it is advisable, because your MP mostly cares about getting reelected, and they mostly care about hearing from their own constituents. So it's possible you can get anyone to sign the petition if you want to, but it would be most useful if you could get people in your own, or in that MP's own writing to do it, because they might recognize those names on the page and they might say, ooh, that guy, he's a big shot. If he's asking for this, or if they're asking for this, then maybe I should think about it. I'll look through for a few more questions. If they don't agree, do we take the petitions and go home? I mean, do take the petitions back, but don't pout. Don't be sad. I fully expect some MPs to say no to this the first time they're asked. But I would recommend, if they don't agree to table the petitions, don't hand them the piece of paper. You can still have the meeting and you can still have that conversation, and you can come back later and say, we got 25 more actually, we talked to more people, you might want to look at this list and you might want to take a look, or you might want to consider tabling it now. So if your MP says no the first time, we do recommend trying again, because it can give you more opportunities to bring up new points to them, talk to new people, and just give another opportunity to change their mind. You can also do a bit of pressure on them. You know, if they say no, you could go to the local media, you could write an op-ed, you could write a letter to the editor, post on Insta or on social media about, we asked our MP to do this very reasonable thing that the government has already promised to do, and they said no. That kind of pressure can work pretty well. I'll just scan for a few more questions and then we'll keep going.
Hey, Robin. Someone sent me a direct one asking, oh, where did it go? How do we find the other people in our riding who are already collecting petitions?
Great question. So folks, the first step I should have mentioned actually, the first step is to sign up. Let us know that you're doing this so that we can keep in touch with you. Maybe Emma or Dylan can drop that sign up link in the chat. If you sign up there, me and Dylan keep an eye on that list every day. We take a peek. And so if there's folks, like for example, there's a number of people who have signed up in Toronto, and we've only been doing this for a week and a half, but a few days ago, I just sent them all an email and said, I want you all to know that you're all working on this. You can decide if you'd like to organize together. So we'll connect you with other folks in your area. How do I know if MP tables and speaks on the petition? That is a great question. You can ask, when you ask your MP and they say, sure, I'll table it and I'll speak about it, you can ask them when. They should know, because Parliament is quite scheduled. They should be able to tell you at least a few days in advance of when they're going to speak, when they're going to do it. You can tune in on CPAC. What does CPAC stand for? Canadian Parliamentary Television. It's like the live stream of Parliament. You can watch them do it there. There's also in Hansard, it's like the written report of Parliament all the time. So there's a few ways. That's a great question. And I'm going to make a note to send some links about that, because I think it'll be easier for me to send links than answer that question effectively here. Thank you for that important question, Emily. Okay. I don't see any more questions, and there will be more time for questions later. So maybe we should keep going. What do you think? Cool.
Yes, I'm going to share screen.
Great. So we just want to give everyone a minute. Just take a minute to think with yourself about who can you get to sign the petition that your MP would pay attention to. So, you know, of course, anyone can sign the petition, and anyone who is interested should. And another way to think about this is, if there's some people who have clear influence over your MP, could you ask them to sign the petition as well? So let's take a minute to think about that. And then the second element of this is that, like I was saying before, this is also about movement building. So are there any ways that you can use this petition where you live to build connections across movements, or to expand your reach and base within your community? So let's just take like 60 seconds to have a think about that. And if any good thoughts come up, you can pop them in the chat if you like. I'm loving some of these ideas I'm seeing in the chat. I might just read them out while we're thinking. Someone suggested that they could get it signed by their local city councillor. I think that would be great if you could do that. Emma said that she's going to work with some local union reps to get it signed. That sounds good. There's some eco committees, 125 people. That's fantastic. These are some great ideas. I saw one question that I think I'll just respond to now, and then we'll keep going. You don't have to be 18 to sign this petition. Anyone who lives in Canada of any age can sign on. So if you are a kid or you have a kid, you can yeah, you could take it to school, to any kind of youth-oriented things as well. That would be perfectly fine. Oh yeah, someone's saying they might get their former MP and current MLA to sign it. That would be really powerful. Okay, so keep thinking about that if you like, or chew on that question later. Maybe we'll move along. Emma, can I have the next slide, please? So we just want to run through, oh, Dylan, this would be a good time. Could you show us the polling results? So when folks were coming in, we asked the question, what kind of engagement have you had with your politicians in the past? And I wonder if Dylan can show us the answer.
Yeah, I'm sharing now. Folks should hopefully be able to see it. If you can't see it, you might be able to click on the 3-dot thing where and see where polls are and see the results there.
Huh. I can't see it either, Dylan. Could you give a rundown of how many people have, could you just let us know how many people have met with their MPs before?
Just for folks who might not be able to see it, 59% for meeting with MPs, 92% signing a petition, 81% attending a rally.
Cool. So this is an experienced group. I'm sure a lot of what I'm about to say will be introductory to some of you, but I'll say it anyway, just so we're all on the same page. Emma, if you want to share the screen again, I can just talk through some key points that you can think about while meeting with an MP. So also all the things I'm about to say are in the toolkit we made to go with this petition. So don't feel like you need to scramble down all these notes. We have them available for you in multiple forms. So you've called your MP, you've got a meeting, maybe it's in person, maybe it's on Zoom. The meeting starts, your MP is there, possibly a staff person, a few folks that you are organizing with are there. And so the first thing you want to do is introduce the group and find out who you're meeting with. What I like to start with here is also asking the MP what they already know about a just transition, because that can give you a lot of useful information to guide the rest of the conversation. You can explain the petition and, oh, that week of action part should be gone. You want to explain the petition and why it is that the just transition legislation is important to you. And if you have a personal story or some kind of personal anecdote to share about why these demands matter to you, that would be really important to share, because those kinds of stories are really what stick with people in the long run. So once you have some chit chat and you find out a little bit about what your MP thinks, you can ask them. You should ask them very directly. One experience I have had recently is that you might have to ask this question very clearly a couple of times to get a clear answer. But what you want to ask is, will they table the petition and will they read it aloud in Parliament when it resumes? You want to take notes on what they say in general and also what their answer to that question is. Will they table the petition and read it aloud or not? If you're comfortable with it, you can take a picture with your group, with the MP. If you're on Zoom, you can do a screenshot of the meeting, and then you can use that to post on social media and share it with us. Emma, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So the key ask here is, are they going to table the petition and will they speak about it in the House? So if they agree, once they agree, you can ask them to, they should know the process for this, but just in case, they need to take the petitions, the paper, to the petitions clerk to certify them so they can get into the House of Commons as soon as possible. And then you want to ask them either in the meeting or in a follow-up email when that's going to happen and when they're going to read it. And if they don't agree, if they refuse or are evasive and don't give you an answer about whether or not they'll table the petition and speak about it, then you're going to want to ask them why it is they won't do that and record it in some way. And then after the meeting, you want to debrief with your team. So some things you could ask after the meeting, I would recommend, say you've got a meeting from 10 till 10:30, you might want to spend 20 minutes after that until 11 o'clock or whatever, just chatting with your teammates, the folks you went to the meeting with, just to debrief. How do people feel? Did it feel useful? Did it feel awful? How did people do? Did anyone make a great point? Did anyone tell a great story? Did anyone really ask the question and stick it to them? Well, what worked well? What was one thing your team could have done better? Remembering that you'll probably meet with this MP again to deliver more petitions in the future. What's something you could do better the next time around? And then some logistical questions you can ask each other is, about confirming next steps. Are there any outstanding action items? What do people need to do? And especially who is going to send a follow-up email to the MP and their staff just to say, thanks for the meeting, just confirming, you said you would do it and you said you'd do it on this day. Thank you very much. So that kind of confirmation with the MP is really useful. Can I have the next slide, Emma? Oh, I have a whole slide on this. I'm so smart. So yeah, you wanna send the MP an email afterwards. It's always good to have things in writing. So if they confirm that they will, if they said in the meeting that they would table the petition, just write that down, confirming that you said you would do it and that you'll take it to the petitions clerk and that you'll speak about these petitions in the House. Thank you very much. It was lovely meeting with you. Something like that. And then this is a very important part. If your MP says, yes, they will table the petition, we would very much appreciate if you would fill out the form that will pop in the chat. It's just a report form. It's very short, but it just lets us know that your MP has said yes. And that's really useful for us because it helps us tell the story of what's going on. It helps us keep track of who's organizing and how it's going. And it helps us brag about the important work that you're doing through all of our channels and on social media. So if you could please do that and post about it on social media as you like, that would be wonderful. I just see a question. If an MP refuses to table, should one ask what it would take? Yeah, that would be a great thing to ask. If they say, no, I'm not going to do this, they should give you a reason. And I think it's reasonable for you to expect and to ask them to explain the reason that they're not going to do it. So we can take a minute to think about which MPs we want to meet with. So I said before that it's possible for any person in Canada to deliver a petition to any MP in Canada. However, we suggest, unless your MP is truly a climate denier, we suggest that meeting with your own MP in this case is best because you are their constituent and they are responsible directly to you and the community that elected them. However, there is some choice here. So we just want to give everyone a minute to choose if they're going to deliver these petitions to their own MP or not. And then let me just look at my notes so I don't get jumbled here. I appreciate everyone's patience. We had a little hiccup right before we started, so we're practiced, but we're flying by the seat of our pants a little bit here. So yeah, if there's a good reason for you not to meet with your MP and meet with another MP, like for example, if you're right on the border and one MP is very friendly and one's not, that might be a good reason. Or if your whole organizing crew is in the next riding over, that would be a good reason. So we'll just take a minute to think about which MP you want to meet with. And then we're going to, nope, I have some more questions to inform your thinking. Some things you might think about before the meeting are like, what do you know about that person? I've been guilty of this in the past, of like thinking about politicians as like some kind of object, but not full people. And so it's useful for me, at least, to remind myself, this is a person, they're a whole person, they have a job and they have a whole life. And so like, how do they see themselves? Do they see themselves as a community leader? Do they see themselves as a climate leader? Trying to get a feel for that before you go. Thinking also about who that MP might listen to can help inform who you're going to ask to sign the petition and who you're going to invite to come with you to that meeting. So Emma, can I go? Oh, okay, cool. So we're at breakout groups, right? I'm just
Yeah, we are. Thanks,
Perfect.
Robin. I
Okay.
just think it's nice sometimes when you're talking for us to see each other's faces. So I took screen share off.
That's great.
Thanks so much for answering all the questions. We're trying to end this workshop within a half hour from now to give you all a time check. And now we're going to go into breakout rooms. And I've been asking you all what parties you're with because we're going to go into breakout rooms based on the party of your MP. And so most of you I've assigned to a breakout room already, and I'm going to start them now. Each breakout room has a different facilitator. So Anthony is on the call from the Climate Emergency Unit, and he's going to be working with the folks who have a Liberal MP. We've got Dylan, who's going to be working with the folks who have a Conservative MP. And then Robin's going to work with folks who have an NGP MP. And we're going to be taking notes on the discussion and sending them to you all afterwards, so you're prepared with talking points. We are going to stop recording the call at this point and come back and record it afterwards because we can't record breakout sessions.
Thanks for participating in those conversations. The one I was in was really great. I hope everyone got something useful out of that. I'm just going to pull up my notes so I don't miss anything here in the closing. I hope that in those breakout groups, you got a chance to talk about some practical next steps and some practical tips about what you'll do next and how you'll meet with your MPs. So if you want to take a second just to think to yourself, remind yourself what your action items are, what's the next thing you're going to do. And then if you want to type them in the chat, I see a few questions in the chat as well that we might be able to get to before too long. But if you want to take a minute to think about what you're going to do next and then type it in the chat and let us know, I think it would be really inspiring to see the actions that people are committing to take next. So I'll give everyone a minute to do that. Thank you. I see one question I'll just answer verbally because it'll be easier. Someone asked if we already have folks in Jagmeet Singh's riding, and I'll say we have folks in Vancouver, but I don't think anyone has gone directly to him to ask for this yet. But that is a gap that we should fill stat. So I am curious if everyone just wants to scroll through and look a little bit at the different actions people are going to take. Folks are finding out other people in their riding who are working on this so they can get key folks to sign the petition. They're going to get in touch with their MPs and folks in their area to meet with their MPs. I like this one. Someone's going to coordinate with their compatriots. They're going to master the materials and they're going to set up an MP meeting. That is a plan if I've ever seen one. This is a wonderful list of action items. I'm so glad to see that from all of you. So before we go, this is kind of the end. We've recorded this session and we'll make it available to you all. We'll send you a whole slew of links and some notes from this workshop. Thank you so much for coming and spending this time with us. I think this tactic is working really well already and it's going to go off the chain in the next couple of months. So this is really great. This is the second workshop we're running. We already did one on Monday and it was equally wonderful. So I'm really excited to see how this goes in the next little while. Before we go, I will remind everyone here to sign up on the sign up form. I think Emma's going to drop it in the chat. The reason that this form is so important is that it's very challenging to keep in touch with people and stay organized with this. But if you fill out this form, it will make it a lot easier for us to keep in touch with you and to give you good email or to give you good information as we learn as we go, and to connect you with more workshops like this or ones we might run in the future. So please do fill that out. And when you meet with your MP, please let us know and fill out that other report form for that. You'll get all these links tomorrow. And I think that's it. I think that's the end. We're just so glad that we got to spend this time with you. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a great evening. Or
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.